I am fucked. I'm totally fucked. Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Business Blaze. I, as always, am your boy with the blaze. What happens here is Danny shall write me a script. I'm going to read the script and add some jokes and some stupid thoughts and some bullshit like that. And then Sam is going to sprinkle in some fine vintage memes.
Sprinkles? That's three things. I'll tell you what's going on. This office is cursed.
You probably know this because you're a regular here. If you're not, welcome. This is going to be weird. If it's your first time, that's okay. You'll get used to it, or you won't and you'll never come back, in which case it was nice briefly knowing you. This episode is brought to you by the legends over at Blinkist. Why am I squinting at my phone? Well, because I left my iPad at home. So, the first 100 people to go to Blinkist.com/blaze will get unlimited access to Blinkist to try it for 1 week. Mwah! You'll also get 25% off if you want the full membership. Why is it so small on the phone? Why can't you just fit it? Why does it have to be like this, Google? This is great pranks that went horribly wrong. If you're wondering why this has absolutely nothing to do with business, well, this channel started off as about business and then it gradually progressed into a combination of ridiculousness, memes, and Danny in-jokes. So,
girl, get ready, they gonna meet me your ass to death, bitch. Wait, what does me mean?
I'm not sure that I could have ever been involved in the setting up of a particularly elaborate prank. It's the kind of thing that only really enters your head after you've had a few drinks around a mate's house as somebody else has passed out on the kitchen floor, by which time it's too late to feel bothered about doing anything too creative. Au contraire, Danny. Two of my finest pranks, which maybe I'll elaborate on in future videos. The first one was convincing a friend of mine that I was an international drug dealer and that he should become involved in my international drug deals. And he was in for it. Second one was I made my sister believe that she'd won the lottery when she hadn't, which was particularly cruel. Let's move on. If you'd like to hear those stories, well, onlyfans.com. Not really, I don't have an OnlyFans. Stop it!
Alright then, keep your secrets.
We did once start supergluing coins to the forehead and hands of one such unconscious guy while we were enjoying a boozy night indoors down the big fancy house of a friend whose parents had gone out for the evening. But the atmosphere turned sour when the victim woke up and didn't see the funny side after spending 10 minutes trying in vain to remove the coins that were superglued to his body. He eventually roared with rage, "Who has done this to me?" He then staggered towards the front room window and put his head right through it. Oh, dude. Someone's parents are gonna be pissed. I'm not sure if this was a last-ditch desperate attempt to remove the coins from his on his forehead? Oh, you did say on his forehead. I mean, that's a bit rough. Superglue isn't something that comes off. I guess they have some magical potion in hospitals that will remove it, but wow, dude, harsh. Or if he was just trying to express his current mood via the medium of broken glass. It sounds like a Yoko Ono song. But either way, the host's parents weren't massively impressed when they came back home slightly earlier than we'd hoped to discover a smashed front window and a furious young man running around the place like he was on fire. That's the trouble with pranks. It often seems like a waste of time to try and set anything up too complicated in hope of a legendary payoff, as there's usually too much scope for it to all go tits up on some level. I don't know. With the correct execution, less drinking, and honestly, a little more, how shall I put this, flair than supergluing coins to someone's body. They can be really excellent. I think, YouTube and Vine and all these prank things weren't around when I was a kid, but boy, if they were. I would have been pranking all over there and then living to regret it later when people realize that the things I did were actually horrible and that I'm a piece of shit person. Another problem is that regular pranksters often get labeled as dickheads. True. I label myself as a dickhead. I know the US television shows and certain YouTube channels have made relatively recent strides in trying to get elaborate pranks filmed on the trend again, but often with some measure of success. Here in the UK, I think we're still reeling at the memory of Jeremy Beedle, a man who spent over 2 decades carving out a career as a full-time TV prankster, and who, despite being a thoroughly decent bloke who raised over £100 million for charitable causes in the course of his lifetime. God damn! We're still largely considered to be the most deeply irritating man on television. I don't know who this is. And this is going to be another one of those times where all the British people are like, Simon, you never heard of Jeremy, I don't believe it. You can only name 2 of the Beatles. It's like, alright, just because I didn't grow up with my eyes glued to the television, alright? And as I've just illustrated in my opening point, you'd have to wonder if pranksters take the time to consider how their victims are likely to react. It would be nice to think that the outcome always involves a hearty chuckle from the victim as they give you a round of applause and shout, "Oh, bravo, jolly good show." That did happen when I convinced my friend that I was an international drug smuggler. It didn't happen when my sister, when I pretended that she won the lottery. She was very upset that she did not appreciate the elaborate nature of the prank and the effort that I went to convince her of such a thing.
So that was a fucking lie.
But surely it's more likely that they'll just get quite annoyed and aggressive and call you a bit of a twat. Still, maybe we should commend the pranksters for at least attempting to bring joy and laughter to the world at the great personal risk of getting smashed in the face. And we thought it would be nice to run through some of the greatest pranks in history which were pulled off with masterful precision and which resulted in everyone bathing in the radiant glow of good sportsmanship. But then we changed our minds and decided to instead focus on the ones that turned into a show. Yeah, of course we did, because on Business Place, everyone knows it's funnier when things go wrong. When it's like, yeah, and then it worked out brilliantly and everyone was happy. It's like, oh, okay. I know that's the end that everyone would say they want, but it's just more amusing when goes horribly wrong.
Some men just want to watch the world burn.
The aliens are coming. It's not uncommon for a local newspaper to run some kind of funny and fictional news story on April Fool's Day. The usual approach is to come up with something quite absurd but relatively harmless, which will just prompt the reader to question their own intelligence and reflect on how gullible they were to ever fall for such a far-fetched tale. You ideally don't want to frighten the living daylights out of readers with a terrifying story about 10-foot aliens, but that's exactly the angle that the Al Gad newspaper decided to pursue in 2010. Giggles. I thought Danny was going to talk about that. Was it Orson Welles who had that radio broadcast that was the War of the Worlds, and then everyone thought that the aliens were coming and it's the end of the world, except none of that actually happens and 2 people phoned up in concern or something. It's just basically an urban legend. I'm glad we're not covering an urban legend here, because here on Business Place, we're about facts from the Fact Boy, not urban legends and myths from the Fact Boy, alright? The independent Arabic daily newspaper published in Jordan ran a front-page headline which screamed out that a massive UFO containing 10-foot aliens had landed near the desert town of Jaffa, lighting up the whole town with its eerie alien glow, interrupting vital communication lines and causing mass hysteria from the residents who were now fearful for their lives. Now, it could be, if you're wondering what's going on with the back of the script over here, by the way, that's just because I ran out of printer paper, and so I ended up just printing on the back of things that I'd already printed that don't need. By the way, Them Bombs is a fantastic app for iPad or tablets or whatever that you can play. It's really good fun. This was the you have an instruction manual. This was the cover of it, which I didn't need. Why are we talking about this? You're welcome, Them Bombs. Free promotion. Now, it could be argued that the media has some kind of duty of care to its audience. No, it doesn't. Have you seen the media, Daddy? It's basically a joke. I've said it before, the only time I've ever been mentioned in the media, I was like, that's not entirely accurate. And then it made me doubt the media forever. I mean, I should have got there earlier, because it's so much bullshit, so much fake news, so much just twisting of people's words to make it sound one way. It's ridiculous. I don't even read the news anymore. And I'm proud of that, alright? While it's a fun and wacky idea to pretend that the town of Jaffa had become the epicenter of an alien invasion of the planet Earth, some of the more vulnerable readers may have become slightly concerned about the imminent threat of the end of the world. And it turns out that a surprisingly big chunk of the audience were taken in by the story, including the town's mayor. Someone forgot to tell the mayor! On the day of publication, thousands of parents kept their kids away from school in a bid to hide their children and protect them from getting whisked away in a UFO, while the mayor, Mohammed Mlihan, seriously considered evacuating the town's 13,000 residents. Dude, if it's a town of 13,000 residents, that's not that many people. You don't think you just look out the window and be like, where's the UFO again? There isn't. Oh, very funny, guys. Very funny. This all sounds a bit unbelievable. Jordania, if we were playing fake or real, which is where Danny writes the script and some of the stories are just fake and I have to guess them, I would guess this would be fake, but I know it's real because it's just a regular script with facts for the Fact Boy. A Jordanian official later revealed that an emergency plan was almost put into immediate operation as the mayor dispatched security authorities to hunt down the evil alien slime.
Oh, poop.
It's fair to say that the mayor wasn't very impressed when the Alga newspaper was forced to meekly admit that the whole thing had just been a silly prank. It's just a prank, bro! Threatens a lawsuit against the paper for what he elegantly described as a big lie. But he appeared to drop the threat of legal action after the paper offered a humble apology, although the paper's managing director did later sound a little defensive when he declared that the prank had been blown out of all proportion. We meant to entertain people, not scare people. Oh, Mayor. It's just a fun prank. The fact that you're gullible and fell for it is your own fault, you gullible dummy. I seem to remember that when a similar prank was pulled in the Rotherham Record in 1997, the council was flooded with 7 telephone calls, all asking if the alien invasion was likely to affect the time of the closing of the local bookies. Classic Rotherhamites. The Muffin Men. I once had a brilliant idea for getting out of school in the long term. The problem with playing hooky every day is that you eventually reach a point where the school starts wondering why you haven't turned up for 3 weeks, and they get in touch with the parents or guardians, at which point everything turns to Just say appendicitis. There was a kid in my school who, he was away for 6 months with appendicitis. But now I'm an adult. And I was just like, oh my God, that must be a really serious medical condition. He's been off for school for 6 months. Then my brother-in-law got appendicitis, as he was off for I saw him the next week and he was like, yeah, it's a bit painful. Why was this kid off school for 6 months? And on a side note, I had one class, we had a class, I don't know, 15, 20 people in it. And I just took this guy's name. So for the entire 6 months, they take registration. I never showed up. Simon Whistler never came to that class, but the guy who was off with appendicitis, he was there every single day for 6 months, and nothing ever happened.
So that was a fucking lie.
I was only about 11 years old when I came up with the scheme of being off school legitimately without the need for the school to question the long absence. Please be appendicitis. I phoned up the school secretary pretending to be my own dad and politely explained that Daniel wouldn't be in school for the next 3 months because he fallen out of a treehouse and smashed every bone in his body. Looking back now, I think this was quite a bold and imaginative idea for a young lad who was clearly thinking ahead and considering the bigger picture. But sadly, I didn't manage to convince the secretary. Maybe it's because my voice hadn't broken yet. I feel like if you're in that situation, you'd be like, oh, hello. Yes, this is Danny's dad. Danny's not going to be in school for a while. And the teacher would be like, Mr. Salter, are you sure about that? I've really been enjoying you in your band. Yes! It sounds like you've got a very, very high voice. Don't you make fun of my high voice! And she found herself dealing with a squeaky-pitched kid banging on about faulty tree houses. I hung up in panic when she started asking which hospital ward I was meant to be on. Although the ruse didn't work, I seem to remember that I didn't get into too much trouble. This is all put down to a silly prank rather than a genuine attempt to get the next 3 months off school. And I was happy to go along with that. Yeah, it's just a joke. It was a joke. In the case of 2 18-year-old students from Lake Highland School in northeastern Dallas, Texas, I'm not entirely convinced if their scheme was really just a bit of a prank or a plan to really liven up lessons, or if they had a more serious agenda. But whatever the motive, Joseph Tellini and Ian Walker thought it would be a good idea to stuff 40 muffins with marijuana and drop them off in the teacher's lounge as an unexpected... this is going to go terribly wrong. I mean, yeah, this is brilliant in a movie, but in real life, people are going to have issues with this, and they're going to be people with psychiatric disorders and all sorts of gonna go down. This is not a good idea, boys. The fallout from this was an FBI and terrorism task. Alright, America, chill out though. It's not terrorism, is it? Is it?
Are you playing the Muffin Man or the Garbage Man? Huh?
Along with no less than 19 admissions to the local hospital's emergency room. To me, this seemed like quite an over-dramatic reaction from munching on a few space cakes, but I suppose we don't know exactly how much pot was included in that particular student recipe, and I guess that most of the teachers had never digested it before, or at least not for a very long time. Look, who doesn't love smoking weed? Or a bit of a space cake every now and again. Look, nothing wrong with that. However, if I was if I was drugged without my knowledge, I would have issues with that. What's that show where the guy drugs his friends with PCP? Not PC. Was it LSD? He drugs his friend's juice with some crazy, and they're wearing a squid on their head. Someone will know what this is, right? That is crazy. Getting drugged. I'd be really pissed off.
You're afraid to get wet.
The victims complained of nausea, headaches, impaired speech, and lightheadedness. Most of them were discharged fairly quickly, although an 86-year-old receptionist spent 2 days in hospital before being allowed to go home and chill out to some banging tunes. One of the teachers later moaned, "It affected me for 10 days. I had never had marijuana before. It made me paranoid." Yeah, especially because you're like, oh no, don't want to get drugged again. After an investigation into possible contamination of the food supply, Joseph and Ian were eventually arrested after the terrorism task force observed video surveillance of the Muffin 2 dropping off their wicked spike sweets in the teacher's lounge. Life in prison! No parole! It's America, don't forget. Between them, the two students pled guilty to misdemeanor assault charges of assault by recklessly causing bodily harm and secondary felony charges of tampering with a consumer product. Ian got off the lightest as he only helped drop off the muffins. He received 2 years of community supervision, 80 hours of service in a homeless shelter, and ordered to pay his share of the $13,000 restitution. Meanwhile, Joseph, who also cooked up the plan and baked the muffins, was given 5 years of community supervision and 180 hours of service in the homeless shelter, along with his share of the restitution. He was later stripped of his scholarship to Ohio College. So, honestly, it sounds like they got off very lightly. More importantly, the Muffin 2 were ordered to write a lengthily groveling apology, which was printed in the next edition of the Lake Highland School newsletter. Now, if that doesn't teach the little swines a lesson, I'm bang out of ideas. I don't know, the 5 years of community probation or whatever, that sounds like much more of a serious lesson, if I'm being frank. Also, I don't know if it's still the case, but when I was at university, there was like an anti-drugs campaign about you could talk to Frank. And I think you could phone up. Obviously, I never did this, but you could talk to Frank and he'd be there to support you if you had like issues. And the funny thing was, like, there was a drug dealer. A friend of mine knew a drug dealer. He just called himself Frank. It's like amazing. Got problems with drugs? Talk to Frank. He will get you drugs. Let's transition to Blinkist, today's wonderful sponsor. The Blinkist is an app, yes, if you didn't know that. You open it on your phone, which I can't do right now because I'm using my bloody phone to look at the ad read. But basically, look, what we'll do is we'll do this. I'll tell you some talking points, and I'll tell you a little bit about it that Blinkist tell me about, and then we'll open the app, and we'll see what I've been reading, and I'll make some recommendations. Mwah! Oh, the joy. Look, I'm a pretty busy dude. I run like 17,000 YouTube channels. I make a lot of videos. It's a pretty intense life. But also, I realized that I need to read books, because every time I read a book, I'm like, oh my god, that's a brilliant idea. Like, I read a lot of like business books. I'm terrible at business, and it's like, okay, I should like read about this stuff because I need to get better at it, because suddenly I like, instead of just making videos, it's like, oh no, I'm a businessman. Like this got weird. So I read all this stuff, like come up with new ideas, all that kind of but also, it's like hard to sit down and read these books because I'm busy. Did I get that point across already? I think I did. I'm rambling. Blinkist is an app where basically it's got 15-minute summaries of the best non-fiction books. I think there's probably, it says 3,000, but I'm pretty sure it's well over 3,000 now. Look, it's more books than you could ever finish in a lifetime. If I listened to one of these a day, it would take me 10 years-ish, right? Oh, Jesus Christ, that is a lot of books. They're books that have been compressed down into 15 minutes, and they have little blinks, so there's like 1 blink, 2 blink, 3 blink, and it just deals with the key parts of the book. So if there's like some books, like 700 pages, it's like, boom, compress that down into 15 minutes. The most actionable, beautiful stuff. Also, you can not just read them, you can also listen to them. I listen all the time. I say like, yeah, I listen 90% of the time. It's like, no, I don't think I've ever read a single one. I don't know why I wrote 90%. I think because I wanted to show that I use the whole app suite of features. And it's like, look, I prefer listening to stuff because I can't really read. What else? There's 14 million active users, so you're just one of a huge crowd. Which, that might sound like a bad thing, but it's not. It just means it's really popular, and they're working hard to make it even more awesome. Mwah! Look, the first 100 people to go to Blinkist.com/Blaze, you get a week to try it out. Also 25% off if you want the full membership. Now, let me just open up the Blinkist app. All right, what have I been reading? Oh, I read something called I was just talking about how I listen to it. I say read. You know when you meet someone and like you're talking about a book and you're always like, yeah, I really enjoyed reading Steve Jobs' biography, and it's like, I definitely listen to the audiobook, but I say read because it makes me sound smarter. I listen to Superhuman Innovation, which is actually super interesting. It was basically about how AI, like artificial intelligence, is disrupting different industries. Because I saw a really interesting video on YouTube about how, it was from a guy called Tom Scott. Maybe know Tom Scott, he's way more popular than me. And he makes these great videos, and he was talking about how he used AI to generate like topic ideas for his channel. I'm like, that's amazing. And so I was like, I should do some reading on AI. So I picked up this book called Superhuman Innovation, which is super, super interesting. Look, okay, Blinkit's fantastic. Just go to, where's that CTA? I gotta repeat it. It always says repeat it. The first 100 people to go to Blinkist.com/Blaze, you'll get a week to try it out and 25% off if you want the full membership. Mwah! Blinkist legends. Bigfoot goes to Highway 93 south. Some of us are fascinated by the idea that mysterious creatures secretly roam the wilderness and backwaters of the earth. I'll tell you who's not. this guy. The Loch Ness people will be like, Simon, but you cover this often on your other channels. It's like, yeah, that doesn't mean I actually give a shit about it, all right? Steady on. It's like, I made a video about Lord of the Rings on today, I found out. The top comment is like, I feel like someone lost a bet. And I'm like, oh, fucking hell, that video was painful. And people are like, does he not know how to pronounce Quid? I'm like, no, and I don't care either. Number of pronunciations I looked up for that video, big fat 0. The Loch Ness Monster, the Bodmin Beast, the furry trout, the Rotherham subway troll. He's probably a sexual predator, that one. All examples of mythical monstrosities which are usually only ever captured on film by people who are still recovering from the uncomfortable probing of their alien abduction the previous weekend. And of course, one of the most famous celebrity mythical beasts of all is Bigfoot. The massive ape-like creature from folklore is said to mooch about the forests of North America, occasionally operating under the name of Sasquatch. Fascinating! It was Bigfoot who provided the inspiration for a prank cooked up by a 44-year-old man from Kalispell in northwest Montana who was really old enough to know better. The prank seemed downright dangerous to me. Randy Lee Tenby thought it would be funny to dress up as a Bigfoot and then go lumbering around the driving lane of Highway 93 South in a bid to convince motorists that they'd witnessed a rare sighting of the dude with the massive feet. You're gonna get run over, mate. Dressed in a store-bought ghillie bodysuit often used by military snipers as it's made of strips of camouflage fabric, Randy's plan was to lurk in the shadows and then jump out briefly to spook passing motorists before disappearing back into hiding. Dude, are you 8 years old? You're 44 years old! What? It's the kind of thing that could lead to a nasty accident, and it did. During his reckless antics, Randy was struck by a car driven by a 17-year-old girl from Somers. As Randy lay wounded on the floor in his Bigfoot disguise, a second car skillfully swerved to avoid him, which is a bit of good news. But then a third car, driven by a 15-year-old girl, came along and ran right over him. What is going on in America? How can you be driving a car at 15? Is she alone? What is going on? Yeah, I had to instinctively pause to check the age of the driver. It seemed far too young for someone to be legally speeding along Highway 93 South. Yes, Danny! But I was forgetting that some US states let you drive from the age of 5 or something. That can't be true. But can you really drive at the age of 15? Andy later died from his injuries, although thankfully nobody else was hurt. The police later suggested the consumption of large quantities of alcohol may have been a factor in Randy's decision to take a walk down Highway 93 South in a Bigfoot costume. Oh, this was in Florida. This sounds like it should be in Florida. An enormous, muscular, 9-foot smelling hairy ape creature was also later questioned and released without charge. Oh, the Toyota Hoot. I'd like to just briefly mention this quick gag from Hooters, which I actually thought was quite smart for an April Fool's prank. The Panama City Beach brand of the famous restaurants ran a contest for their employees in April 2001 in which the waitress who managed to rack up the most beer sales over the course of the month would be awarded the grand prize of a new Toyota. God damn, that's a pretty good prize. Waitress who worked up enough sweat to shift the most beer at the end of the month was 27-year-old Jodie Berry. And during the exciting winner ceremony, Lucky Jodie was blindfolded and escorted to the restaurant car park, after which the blindfold was removed so that she could gaze upon her hard-earned reward, except that it wasn't a Toyota. The restaurant's manager, Jared Blair, had orchestrated a jolly wheeze in which the real grand prize was to be revealed to be a Toyota, a little plush doll of the famous mud-dwelling, riddle-sprouting Green Goblin from Star Wars. Hilarious. And he argued that he hadn't done anything wrong, as the employees had simply misheard or misinterpreted the name of the prize. And besides, it was just a silly April Fool's Day prank that had been intended to boost staff morale. Well, it will boost staff morale because they'll think they're going to be competing for a Toyota. What will absolutely destroy staff morale, Jared, is when it turns out that you haven't given away a Toyota and no one's going to trust you again because you've betrayed your employees' trust. I'll be like, Danny, if you get me 100 scripts this month, I'm going to give you a Toyota. And Danny will be like, great, and he'll deliver 100 scripts. And then I give him a toy Yoda, and he's going to be like, Simon, I quit. I'll be like, okay, yeah, fair. Definitely fair. And my reputation will be destroyed, and no one will come to work for me.
I'll tell you what's going on. This office is cursed.
How do you end up managing a restaurant with that kind of managerial ability, Jared? It didn't really do much to boost Jodie's morale, though. Feeling that she'd been duped into shifting extra beer for Hooters on the promise of a prize that wasn't delivered, she angrily quit her job and sued the restaurant's corporate owners, Gulf Coast Wings, for breach of contract and fraudulent misrepresentation. The two parties later settled for an amount that was never disclosed. Jodie got a car, allegedly. But Jodie's attorney did reveal afterwards that his client could go into a local dealership and pick out whatever type of Toyota she damn well liked. Legend. Normally I'm like, stop suing each other, but in this case, you're right on, Jodie, and I'm glad you got whatever Toyota you wanted, you legend. The astrologer who didn't know was dead. We have to delve all the way back to early 18th century London to uncover the kind of proper prank that goes several levels beyond anything that could be dreamed up by Jeremy Beedle, this mysterious chap from the introduction who I genuinely don't know. It could well be considered one of the most legendary and powerful pranks of all time. I get the feeling I know this one. Is this where the guy orders like thousands of stuff to one woman's address? And it becomes insane. Although I'm including it here as our final entry, as some might say that the consequences for the victim went well beyond a joke and perhaps way beyond anything that the prankster could have possibly intended. The prankster in question was none other than the Anglo-Irish satirist and author Jonathan Swift. I've heard of him. Did he write Gulliver's Travels? Is that Jonathan Swift? The year was 1707, so this was a good couple of decades before he stopped mucking about and knuckled down to write the epic Gulliver's Travels. Big brain! Back in these younger days, the master of deadpan irony had a bee in his bonnet about those bloody astrologers who were flooding the market with pamphlets full of half-cooked predictions about the future. One such astrologer was John Partridge, who was really raking in the guineas with the annual publication of his Merlinus Almanac, which sold thousands of copies every year to readers who were interested in hearing vague and ambiguous and utterly meaningless predictions for the years ahead. Yeah, dude, you sold nothing. It's been like 300 years, and this is still on sale. People are still buying newspapers with astrology in them, or buying magazines devoted to this. It's like, are you what is going on? Please, stop. It's not real. It's not real.
So that was a fucking lie.
So Jonathan Swift decided to have a bit of fun at Partridge's expense. Under the pseudonym Isaac Bickerstaff, he published his own slim volumes of fortune-telling nonsense called Predictions for the Year 1708, which was quickly snapped up by thousands of gullible Londoners. The brilliant thing about this piece of work from the fictional Isaac Bickerstaff is that the predictions were refreshingly blunt and specific. Partridge's dreary almanacs would include impenetrable drivel along the lines of: when the shadow of a horse is cast over a fairground mermaid from Hackney, the true cucumber kings will reap the harvest of the jelly deal. You can read into that whatever you want, and that's why this stuff is so, like, brilliantly brilliant at ripping people off and nothing else. In contrast, the first is smash that dislike button, although if you're watching astrology, and, what are you doing here? You know I think you're stupid. You know I do. You know I do. I'm looking at you, Peter. In contrast, the first entry in Bickerstaff's book got straight to the point, in exactly the same way that a business play's introduction doesn't. It read, "My first prediction relates to Partridge, the almanac maker. I have consulted the stars of his nativity by my own rules, and find he will infallibly die upon the 29th of March next, at about 11 at night of raging fever. Therefore I advise him to consider of it, and settle his affairs in time." That sounds like a threat, my dude. Weirdly, when the 30th of March came around, the citizens of London were shocked to wake up to the news that the prediction had been uncannily accurate. Oh, dude, if I was the guy, if I was what's-his-name, Jonathan Swift, I'd be like, I am fucked. I'm totally fucked. They're gonna, this is gonna go to court. They're gonna know I murdered him even though I didn't. They're just gonna know. They're gonna know. And I'm gonna get hung. And I'm never gonna write Gulliver's Travels about a big man. And then he was small. Gulliver's Travels is weird. A letter began to circulate around the city addressed to an unnamed lord, which revealed how a gentleman employed in the revenue had sat by the deathbed of poor John Partridge on the night of the 29th of March and witnessed the astrologer's submission to fever. Oh, shit. Apparently, Partridge had spent his final hours admitting that he was a fraudster and conceding that he was now paying the ultimate price brought about by Isaac Bickerstaff's self-fulfilling prophecy. The spooky foretelling rocked old London town to its very core. I bet Swift was like, maybe there's something to this. He wasn't. He was like, what a coincidence. But nobody was more surprised than John Partridge, who woke up alive and well that same morning to the sound of the church bells announcing his own passing. Wait, so it's just a fake? The circulation of the fake letter announcing his death was actually just another layer of the painstaking prank, which had of course been put together by Jonathan Swift. What a legend! Who clearly had a bit of an axe to grind when it came to dodgy astrologers, and who could blame him? Danny's like, it affected his life. Good! And yet for a while, the population seemed to ignore Partridge's defiant protestations that he wasn't really dead. Not surprising, really. Everyone knows that you can never trust the word of a dead man. Everyone knows that. They're dead. Over the course of the next few weeks, undertakers and church officials paid regular visits to Partridge's home in vain attempts to try and get the funeral arrangements underway. Crowds of his former readers held candlelight vigils outside his house, while his name was removed from the stationer's register, which made John Partridge legally dead. He'd be like, guys, I'm right here, can you off, please? This is my house, and you're making a fire hazard. You think Partridge may have paused to consider the tax advantages of being officially dead? Wait, the tax advantages? When you're dead, they take half your money. It's called inheritance tax. It's terrible. I mean, obviously that is open for debate. But if you're the one losing half your money and you're still alive, it's terrible. But he still seemed quite grumpy about the whole thing. Even years later, he would often find himself having to argue that he was the real John Partridge, and that he was very much alive, and not always with success. And even when it became more widely accepted that the whole thing had just been a hoax, he became the butt of everyone's jokes. He would get regularly stopped in the streets by strangers who politely asked how his widow was coping, or how he would, or
that you do.
Or he would be challenged for lacking the basic human decency to be buried. Although it all sounds like a brilliant prank, you can't help feeling just a few grains of sympathy for the guy whose life was swiftly ruined by Jonathan, except for the fact he was a big prankster, big fraudster. He wasn't able to flog his almanacs anymore, and his life as a respected public figure was in tatters as he became an undead target of mockery. Yeah, no, okay, it's fairly brutal. It's fairly brutal. I do have a little bit of sympathy for him, even though he's a charlatan. Partridge spent the final years of his life attempting to uncover the real identity of this scoundrel Isaac Bickerstaff, but he never discovered the truth. Still, if he'd been a half-decent astrologer in the first place, he should have seen this coming a mile off. Yeah, but he wasn't. There's no such thing as a half-decent astrologer. It doesn't exist. This has been an episode of Business Blaze. I have been Fact Boy, your boy with the blaze, also known occasionally as Simon or Dickhead. If you like this video, smash that like button, purchasemerch.co, hook yourself up with some pimp merch, and Blinkist, also very nice, link below. Thank you for watching. Ah!